Hey everyone, Emmerron here. So this week I made two discoveries. First of all, I don't need a headset when I'm just recording because the system sounds are going to get picked up either way. So that's discovery number one. So you'll probably be seeing my ears in these videos from now on because I like to be able to hear when things are happening, including my cats attacking each other, etc. So number one, there's that. Number two, this week, our subject, as I kind of mentioned in last week's video, is going to be making more detailed life paths. So last week we talked a bit about how life path can be used to socially power game and how that can affect kind of the wider game that we're trying to create as GMs, and it can impact not just the GM experience but the player experience as well. So this week, I kind of wanted to go through LifePath and explain how we can do better with what we're giving. Because I think a lot of that desire to inadvertently, in many cases, socially power game simply comes off of the fact that the player in question that is trying to build that character does not see options or see potential in what the standard life path options are. They view them as very bland or generic or a little too non-specific. And I'm here to tell all of you that that is okay. It is okay for them to be bland, generic, and non-specific. That is actually the point. So we are going to go through and kind of discuss those parts of a life path that I think are a little more necessary to be maybe refined a bit. And that's where we as the GM having a more active role in session 0 comes into play. So when you are a GM and you are helping players build out their characters, whether that is during an actual session 0, as we've discussed previously in the channel. If you want to see that video, look right here. I will have posted it. It's also part of the playlist for this How to GM series, which if you've missed any of the episodes and you'd like to go back and see what other topics we have covered, I would highly, highly recommend doing exactly that. But that all said, let's go through really quick and talk a little bit about these more, I guess, specific parts of the life path. So building out a new character, I'm not going to bring it up on the screen, but if you see me looking over to the side here, it's because I've got my book pulled up on my other side of this screen. So the main things about a life path that we start off with are a little more kind of like, they're a little more specific, and they're not something we can really get a ton of more substance out of by kind of helping our players along. And I think this is what I also meant to say a little earlier is we as GMs, even when your players aren't participating in a proper session 0, or we are at the very least not using that time to get our players' characters rolled up, we should still take an active role in helping our players roll up their characters, even in only maybe a review sort of way. I know I've seen players of mine roll their own characters fine from a technical standpoint, but then I do a sort of a proofread or an edit pass, if you will, on the character just to make sure that we haven't maybe overlooked anything that would impact the player experience, especially for new players. New players tend to not realize how important certain skills are, or the fact that skills are like the predominant factor in what our character is capable of. So they assume incorrectly that like combat's just covered. It's not. You actually have to dedicate points in the game to be effective at combat in any way, shape, or form. Firearms are not a default skill, and that's for a reason, right? So you do need to dedicate some time and maybe some education with your players to make sure that they are stocked up on handgun skill or, you know, shoulder arms or something that can shoot a gun if they intend to be able to use those. Not all characters are. I have a martial artist in Neon Inferno who is very dedicated to their craft, and he only took handguns because I suggested that, well, if you don't take handguns, if we ever get into a car chase or a ranged combat scenario where you are, you know, meters and meters away from these adversaries you're fighting and you have no hope of getting close to them in a round, even with his 8 move, by the way, he has 8 move, But even with that, you know, there are going to be cases where you can't get right next to them right away. So you need something to close that gap if you want to be effective at range. And so we took handguns at my recommendation, and he actually has used them on several occasions where he otherwise would have been completely ineffective and out of the fight. So that kind of edit pass can be very, very helpful for exactly that kind of a reason. So that out of the way, let's talk about the actual life path now. So to start off with, we just have cultural origin. This can be important. I find that this is more something that you might have a player pick something they're more familiar with culturally, which I think is smart, because we always run the risk a little bit, I think, of stereotype if we pick a culture that we are not ourselves at least somewhat familiar with. Like, I could probably, for example, role play off being, you know, some form of German, or even like I could probably adequately role play, you know, a Japanese character, because I've done enough reading and research into like studying that culture to not totally lean on stereotype. But for any culture for which your player might be concerned about that, I would say, you know, that's probably a good way to avoid some pretty serious faux pas, especially if you're like me and you are broadcasting your games or recording them for later viewing. We definitely don't want that as much. So it's okay if you have a bunch of players who pick their own kind of cultural heritage, whether that be, you know, like for me, I would definitely feel most comfortable like North American and knowing English, because those are the things that I know the most intimately. Those are my cultural backgrounds in real life. Those of you who are coming from Europe, you'll probably know those cultures better and the more nuanced elements of them. And sometimes that can bring a ton of flavor to a campaign. So like, while this isn't something that we can really draw more out of, it is an important enough choice, because it can color the way that our character approaches certain topics or confrontation or conflict of some kind. Problem solving can be affected by this, so definitely worth looking into. So with that, we now go down to personality. So again, this is going to probably be a little less impactful, or, you know, we're not really able to expand upon this too much. Whatever this comes out to be, just make sure your player is okay with the implications of role playing a particular type of character. For example, if your character is rolled to be friendly and outgoing, so read extroverted, and you've got a very introverted player who maybe is a little less that way, and maybe would align better with a character who's shy and secretive. It's good to remind our players that role tables are only needed when they do not have a well-formed idea of what the character is or what they'd like to play as a player. They can always choose off these tables, so it's definitely something that I recommend the player to read the whole table first, see if there's one that appeals to them more than the others, pick that if they find one, and if not, then roll. And if they don't like what they get on the roll, they're obviously welcome to reroll. So that's the beauty of it. If they, you know, maybe don't have a good idea of what the character is, but they do have an idea of what the character isn't, they can also do that. So never ever tie your players to just, you know, rolling and taking the result. It just leads to bad characters, poorly made characters, characters that the player doesn't want to actually play. That would be a suggestion that I would make. All right, so next up we have dress and personal style. Again, this is more going to be surface level, but it can flavor elements of how our characters are seen in the world and how they express who they are to the world. So again, I would recommend, you know, players picking something that they either they personally relate to, especially if they're a newer player and maybe role play isn't their first language, so to speak, right? If they're not good at role play out the gate, that's fine. A lot of us weren't. I know I wasn't. It's something that comes with practice, and a lot of us are not naturals at it. So if you are one of those players, or you're a GM who doesn't think as heavily about role play, definitely, take this time to maybe pick something that is more familiar to you and that you feel comfortable personally with as a person, and role play a character that strays only a little bit from like who you are as a person in real life. Obviously, it's a sci-fi setting. There will be some differences between who we are in real life and the world we live in, and who our characters are in a world that is far more desperate. So that's just another thing I want to put out here as we're kind of going through these style and fashion kind of choices that we'll make for our characters initially. So with that said, obviously make a choice here that you can align to pretty easily, but don't feel as though this has to like completely define who you are or what you do in the world. It doesn't. It just is going to be kind of the start for like, okay, what kind of thoughts does my character have? What do they view themselves as? If they are like, for me, I like wearing a lot of graphic tees, occasional like streetwear or more like jeans and stuff like that. Like by the game standard, I'm probably pretty like casual chic. I'm not dressing up a lot. I'm very like plain clothes with a little bit of flair where I feel like I want to express myself. That is what these choices are indicative of. They're indicative of those things that maybe we always wear. Like, for example, I always wear my rings. You would have a character who maybe always has a certain tattoo that they are like very, very attached to, right? And you could even extend that out to mean like they do henna, right? It doesn't have to even be like a permanent tattoo. Maybe they just got henna that they, regularly reapply in a particular spot in a particular pattern, and that has meaning to them, or the ritual of doing that is significant for them. So these are ways, again, that our characters slowly start to take a more like defined form, and they have a more refined place in the world, right? So now we're going to start getting into the stuff that really, in my opinion, is why I want to make this video, because this is going to be more of the stuff that on a first glance, it's going to look painfully generic. It's going to look painfully like, wow, that's bland. I don't know what the heck I would do with that. Why would I ever pick these things? But I promise you, these are really, really cool because of how generic they are. All they do really, if you imagine it as a painting, is they define the outline for us and they allow us to fill in the lines, which is great. I love anything that lets us do our own filling in of the lines, but it establishes lines pretty well. That is a good thing for a character that you are going to essentially define more strictly. So, for what we have now, we have motivations and relationships. So we have a list of things that we value the most. So these can range anything from money to friendship, vengeance. So these are going to be like what is pushing your character forward as they explore the dark future. Are they in search of something that is maybe more altruistic? Are they very selfish? Like, this is the first time we actually get to kind of better define those parts of our character. And this value is a little less, it's a little less able to be zeroed in on. But again, this is going to be that next layer on, okay, well, what does my character think about? What are they constantly like worried about? What are their main motivations for existing in the world that they exist in? And then how do we feel about most people? So this is going to be, there's a higher chance here, just because it's 2 spots on the roll table if you roll for this, where you stay neutral. So you stay neutral about other people. You don't hate them. You don't like them. Then there's, I like almost everyone. I hate almost everyone. There's people are tools, use them to achieve your goals and then discard them. Every person is a valuable individual. They're obstacles to be destroyed if they cross me. They're untrustworthy. Don't depend on anyone. Wipe them all out. Let the cockroaches take over. And people are wonderful. The very extroverted, bubbly, like, oh, I love people, not the sarcastic one that, we always joke about in my house. Oh, I love people. People are great. So With that said, though, this is, again, going to like define our character's thought process. It's going to say, okay, I'm motivated by this. I feel this way about the people. Therefore, like my immediate surroundings, right? These two things are going to, they look very simple and straightforward, but these are going to, by and large, define how our character views the world around us, right? And in a very immediate way. It's not just the larger conceptual, what do I think about like the wider world? It's what do I feel about where I am right now on a street corner in the middle of the city? Next, we have things you value the most. So now we're going to start getting those things that we can really draw some extra substance out of in a meaningful way. These are where I start adding what I call enhancement questions to my players. So this is going to ask who the most valued person in your life is. Now, this is where we get to, you know, things like parents, siblings, lovers, friends, yourself. If you're a narcissist, which again, not too uncommon, I think, in a civilization like one of Night City in 2045. You've got a pet, a teacher or mentor, a public figure, a personal hero, or no one. Now, no one is pretty self-explanatory. Yourself, pretty self-explanatory, right? But even in those cases, we can ask a question here as the GM for those in particular, which is, now, what is it that makes you value no one or yourself over everyone else, right? Or what makes you value no one in particular? You know, where does that come from? And so now you're asking the player to think as their character and come up with an answer for why don't you value anyone? Or why do you only value yourself? And they are going to need to respond to that because that gets them in their character's head. That's where the beauty of this starts to come in. So once they've answered that question for those, we can look at some of these other ones too. We could ask, okay, what's this person you value, regardless of any of these other options? What's the person you value? What's their name, right? And if they like, oh, I don't really have a name, there's a great fantasy name generator. I'll try to put that down in the description here, that I use regularly. It's got a bunch of different names in it, both based in reality, as well as like they've got a Cyberpunk nickname generator or handle generator. So if you maybe had a mentor and it was some street ganger, you could come up with, okay, yeah, this guy named Delta, right? So Delta was my mentor. And then you as a GM could go, okay, and why do you value Delta so highly? Well, he pulled me out of a gutter after a bar fight that went way south against me, and kind of showed me the ropes as a, you know, new street kid, who just got kicked out on the streets after losing their job. Now we've started really building, right? That one question leads to this long narrative that like our player just maybe came out of nowhere and just was like, this is who Delta is. This is where my place in the world starts, right? So that's where we're getting them to think about that, right? We're getting to think about more detailed history for who they are in the world and why that's important. The next one's really fun based on that. So the next one is, what is the most valued possession that you own? And this could be a weapon, a tool, a piece of clothing, a photograph, a book or diary, a recording, a musical instrument, a piece of jewelry, a toy, or a letter. Now, my suggestion is to get this item, and if your player does not have a clearly defined idea of what the item's significance is yet, that's okay, because there's some additional things we can roll later on and we can come back to this. So don't feel as though each time we find one of these things that we can ask an enhancement question about, that we need a really well-defined answer right that second. We can let them cook, right? We can let the player cook on it a little bit, think about it a little harder, and come back to it later. And we might find that, you know, oh, wow, yeah, that's right. I had a tragic love affair. This ring I have was theirs. And I carry it in remembrance of them. Like, that's a thing we won't roll till later. So if they roll something on this, or they, you know, don't have a particularly strong attachment or attraction to any of these items, roll note the roll result, and then just say, okay, we'll come back to this in a moment, and then continue. So the next thing we have here is family background. So again, this is going to be another one that we can spawn a ton of very detailed narrative out of. So we've got, for original backgrounds, we've got corporate execs, corporate managers, corporate technicians, a nomad pack, a ganger family, combat zoners, urban homeless, megastructure warren rats, reclaimers, and edge runners. So, and I realized counting up on my fingers there probably made sense to no one because I wasn't using both hands. That's fine. Bottom line, there are 10 of these results, and these all have descriptions. Again, I won't go into those for brevity's sake, but this is going to, again, better define, you know, like if we ask that enhancement question above, like, oh, Delta, yeah, the guy who pulled me out of the trench or the gutter, Delta, the guy who put me out of the gutter, he was an edge runner, or he was a ganger. And I joined a street gang for a time while I kind of learned the ropes of being a cyberpunk in Night City. So like this is going to be where we maybe pick this now instead of rolling on this. But if we're still not feeling particularly well defined, again, we could roll on this, see if the fit feels right, and then go back to those earlier roll tables and we can better define, like, okay, you picked a letter. Was the letter maybe some letter from your background, right? Like, was it from someone in your background? And again, most new players are maybe not going to have as well-defined an idea of what they want out of this yet. Totally fine. We can roll, and again, just like the possession, we can reserve this for later because there are tables later that actually serve as like better definition of this. So with that said, we now go to your environment that you grew up in. So we've got, you know, the street, a safe corp zone, nomad pack with, or a nomad pack that roam from place to place, a nomad pack with routes in transport. So that'd be like a ship, a plane, or a caravan. So the ones that are running throughout the country or even across the ocean to deliver goods between the different civilization hubs. Because remember, in 2045, we're dealing with a society that has by and large collapsed its avenues of communication. Satellite communication really doesn't, you know, work great because the net has been taken down. Intercity communication is so sparse that you have to like do a pulse once. I think it's like every hour in order to get the word from, you know, Night City to Seattle or whatever. So the nomads, transport nomads are like incredibly important in that regard. So like if you're a part of such a pack, you would probably have seen a lot of different things that your average person in a city like Night City would never have seen. Just because you've been out there seeing the world and what the people of that one city know. Like Night City is the default, I think, that a lot of things, especially the book itself, assumes you're playing in. But like, if you think about a city and the idea of a city net, that is one air gap network. To see stuff beyond your air gap, you would either have to have collected it into the data pool somehow, or the government more likely would have had to collect it into your local data pool. So images like what we can go out right now, for example, you and I type in Japan and see photos all over Japan of that country. We could visit Japanese websites. We can do all kinds of stuff that lets us get a bird's eye view into Japan without ever having gone there ourselves. They don't have that luxury in this civilization. They might have pictures, but they are not going to have like that up-to-date, highly relevant, like beat by beat kind of news media like what we have. So these nomad packs are incredibly important. Just a little addendum. I wanted to add why that is specifically an important one to note, because they're the ones who are seeing all of this. And so that's going to, again, be another coloring on what our player sees as their character, right? In a decaying, once upscale neighborhood, now holding off the boosters to survive. So they're like, you know, at the fringe of a combat zone in what we would call like a 1, 2, or 3 block. Basically, you're 1, 2, or 3 blocks from the edge of the combat zone, and that can change like hour by hour, even in really volatile parts of the city. In the heart of a combat zone, living in a wrecked building or other squat. Again, we see a pretty good example of this in 2077 when we go to the scav haunt at the very start of the main campaign. We get to see kind of what that squalor looks like. Even if that is in more of like a high-rise building, it is still applicable that those are the kind of environments you'd be dealing with. Walls that have either been burrowed through or collapsed because of neglect or intent, one way or the other. Lots of dingy, not well-maintained apparatus there. Booster gangs selling drugs or scavenging chrome, that kind of thing. And a huge mega structure building is the next one, controlled by a corp or the city. So these are, again, going to be the giant mega structures like what we see V living in 2077. In the ruins of a deserted town or city taken over by the reclaimers. So this would be something, another example again, because these are good visual examples if you played 2077. Rocky Ridge, the abandoned town you go into with Pan Am when she's chasing Nash. This is what that would be if you had a group of people who were trying to reclaim it and revitalize it, essentially, when they were trying to pull it from the ashes and make it something livable again. So think of that kind of a thing, or something a little closer to the city that maybe would be like where the Rancho Coronado kind of trailer parks are. Those would likely have been at one point these kind of abandoned settlements that have been reclaimed and made habitable again by reclaimer nomads. In a drift nation, which is a floating offshore city that is a meeting place for all kinds of people. So these are where like sea nomads and maybe some air nomads even would gather. These are going to be at the smallest a couple of barges that are kind of tied together. At their biggest, they're going to be, like whole nations that are built upon a floating, landmass or something. The biggest of these that I'm aware of is the Meta-Key, which is ironically where my players are going in 2077 in Neon Inferno right now. They're headed for the Meta-Key. So that's a timely little reference here. And then finally we have in a corporate luxury star scraper high above the rest of the teeming rabble, which I've talked about Pixel/Persephone before on this channel. She's one of the characters that my friend Erica plays in Neon Inferno. This is where she selected, and it's what got her thinking about what her character's like and like what produces an edge runner that has lived in a star scraper. Like what brings that person who's lived this high mighty life down to the streets and like forces them to do the things a typical edge runner will do. So now we have your family crisis, because of course, what is a good cyberpunk story without a downfall, right? So for a family crisis, we have you lost everything through betrayal. Your family lost everything through bad management. Your family was exiled or otherwise driven from their original home, nation, or corporation. Your family is imprisoned. You alone escaped. Your family vanished. You are the only remaining member. Your family was killed. You're the only survivor. Your family is involved in a long-term conspiracy, organization, or association, such as a crime family or revolutionary group. It's a very interesting one. Your family was scattered to the winds due to misfortune. Your family is cursed with a hereditary feud that has lasted for generations. And then finally, you are the inheritor of a family debt. You must honor this debt before moving on with your life. So this crisis is another motivator for us, right? Like, and it maybe defines, again, some of the things above that we've already gone through. Maybe now, like, we look at what motivates us and we say, I'm the inheritor of a family debt. Maybe that's why I'm money motivated. It's not just I want to get rich. I want to get rid of this debt, and I want to like solve that problem for myself before it gets even worse, right? That could be a major motivator again. So this crisis, again, kind of builds a part of our past that better illustrates some of these things. So as we go through this now, we might want to go back up and look and say, okay, what have we already picked? What have we got up further up the list now? Does this all still make sense given our current understanding of things? Are we okay with that making sense in the way that it does, or do we want to redefine some part of this? It's always good to kind of go one step back up and just say, does this make sense, right? Next, we have, we roll for friends and enemies. So this is one of the true random parts of the character creation process for Lifepath. I have been known to flub this a little bit when a character has a very defined idea of like who they are and their place in the city. Obviously, we're not going to go overboard with this. Even if we allow for them to pick a friend or something, that is something that, you know, has to be done very carefully. Connections are everything in Night City. Reputation is everything in Night City. All of these things are like very important, and they are what give our character soft power in the game. So that said, the way we roll for friends and enemies is the same. You roll a d10, subtract 7, and we get to see how many friends we have. So in other words, the most friends that we can start off with at the beginning is 3, and we can never, you know, obviously be less than 0. So it strongly leans towards you having no friends at the start. Likewise, it also leans stronger towards you having no enemies. This is important because if above we've defined, you know, that, hey, we had this horrible thing happen to our family, maybe our enemies don't know who we are, or that we escaped, or, you know, whatever the means of that tragedy occurring were, our enemies aren't aware of it. Likewise, our friends, the people that we would have leaned on back then, are unaware that we lived or got out of it or whatever. They just wrote us off as either dead or run far away so far they couldn't help us, etc. But each of these have, you know, what kind of person they are. So for friends, we have, you know, like an older sibling, younger sibling, teacher or mentor, partner or coworker, former lover, old enemy, like a parent, an old childhood friend, someone you knew from the street, or someone with a common interest or goal. So these can get pretty loose, right? Like someone with just a common interest or goal, it's not so close to being like a friendship necessarily as a, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I am aiming for a goal that this other person is aiming for as well, so we can be friends, right? And I think to kind of, again, bring it to a comparison in 2077, I think that V and Jackie have a range of these, depending on which life path you start with. I think that, you know, when you're a street kid, it's more like having just, you kind of become friends with someone that has a common interest or goal to you, which is get off the street, right? You have a common enemy in, you know, Styles, who are, no, Stints, that's his name. So you have a common enemy in Stints at the start of the game where he comes up to you and draws a gun on you and Jackie and's like, all right, street trash, it's time to die, you know, like does this whole bluster thing and then eventually just kind of drops you off at the side of the street. You and Jackie are going to be together in that kind of situation. But if you are, you know, a corpo, you're much more close to Jackie at the start of the game, it feels like. You know him. You know him so well that when a job lands in your lap that is particularly unpleasant and you like, I need a solo to do this, Jackie is the first one you call. He's the first one you think of. So with that said, we get to define kind of how well we know our friend, right? And again, we can, as a GM now, ask our player, okay, well, like, what was this person's name? How do you know them? You know, dig a little deeper. Like, what was the particular job that you were on when this person kind of fell in with you? Similarly, your enemies, you have all kinds of different enemies. You have an ex-friend, ex-lover, a strange relative, childhood enemy, a person who works for you, a person you work for, a partner or coworker, a corporate exec, a government official, or a booster ganger. And then you've got a series of causes and what they can throw at you. Again, not going to go through those for brevity. But bottom line, this will kind of give us a pretty defined power dynamic for who our enemy are and like, what are they going to do? And this can be down to like, they won't do anything. Like they're too chicken shit to come after you, but they know of you, right? Like the fact is you have an enemy out there somewhere and they are too chicken shit to do anything to you directly. That doesn't mean that they won't stoop. That doesn't mean they won't inform on you. That just means that right now at the start of the game where we come in and start assuming control of this character, their enemy is not in a position to do anything. And then finally we have revenge. So it's not really ugly until the bad blood between you and enemies finally comes to the surface. When you meet, metal's going to be shred. So what's going to go down when they get back in your face? So is what are you or they going to do about it? So again, that's going to, be more of that kind of like, are you going to move punk kind of mentality about this, which is avoid the scum, go to a murderous rage, physically rip their face off, backstab them indirectly, verbally attack them, set them up for a crime or transgression they didn't commit, or set out to murder or maim them. So this is going to be maybe like, what do you aim to do about this enemy of yours? Avoiding the scum isn't really chicken shit. It's more just like, they're not really worth my time. Like, I don't really see a point in them. Next, we roll for tragic love affairs. So this is, we again roll D10 minus 7. So again, top number we can get for this is 3 at the start of the game. We could have 0. And then we get to roll a D10 table on like what happened to this person. And again, this is where that important item comes in, is like, if we do get a tragic love affair and we get something where it's like, well, they were killed in a fight. Well, now that, might really force us to consider like, okay, well, what was that item we have from above? Was it something they held? In some cases, I've known to, like, let me see, where is it? Your lover was kidnapped or your lover mysteriously vanished. Those are great hooks for us as GMs. So your character, your player may not know what happened to that person, right? But now that they've mysteriously vanished, they can show up later. And I've done this. I had Wei, our martial artist, his estranged fiance, who randomly just vanished into the night one night, and he assumed she was either gone, dead, or something. She shows up coming in through his window, planning to kill him, not realizing that it's him she's been sent to kill. And this has turned into like a whole sub arc in Neon Inferno now. This is where that started. So like, this is a huge thing that we get to have as a GM then, to be like, hey, yeah, so you remember this person, like my player's fiance's name is Yuria. So you remember Yuria, right? And he's, oh, I remember Yuria. There she is in the flesh right in front of you, wielding a knife, ready to kill you. Like that's just what you can get out of this. That's why this is an important lesson, I think, to teach. And then finally we get to life goals. So these are going to be, where we get to get rid of a bad reputation, gain power and control, get off the street no matter what it takes, cause pain and suffering to anyone who crosses you, live down your past life and try to forget it, hunt down those responsible for your miserable life and make them pay, get what's rightfully yours, save, if possible, anyone else involved in your background like a lover or family member, gain fame and recognition, or become feared and respected. So again, this is another place where we can ask our player, okay, why is that your goal based on everything we've discussed so far? What about these other elements have brought you to this? And we can do that cross-check. So this is the general life path, right? And there are going to be more role-specific life paths that we would get into then after. For the purposes of this video, I don't think there's quite as much value in kind of nitpicking through those, because those are going to be less of an important factor when you're just starting out. I would still encourage you to kind of take the same approach with those though, and, define them better. So some good rules of thumb as we kind of move to wrap this video up. So the first thing that I would look at is this. If a person is mentioned, what is their name? What are they to you? What is their role in your life? So we can define people's names, people's relationships to us. Why are they important or a problem? If locations are mentioned, where is it? What is its significance? What does it do in the wider aspect of the city? For example, if it says you work out of a club, well, why that club? What about that club makes it a place that your character decided was okay to work, right? Like I play a med tech who has a medical facility, like a basic room essentially, that's attached onto a booster gang club. Like, why is that where he has his outfit? Well, my parents worked for the gang. I am a child of that gang, essentially. I've done stuff at the very least around them since I was a small child. So when I got to the point that I started to fix people up after gang shootouts, after my parents were arrested, like, I wanted to continue helping them out. And so the leader of the gang, knowing that I was able to piece people back together, and in particular, I pieced her brother back together after a particularly gnarly fight, she granted me use of one of the old storage rooms for the club as a medical studio so that I could do my work in a well-stocked facility, essentially. And so that's kind of where we get to when we talk about locations, right? When we talk about those role life paths, there will be location-based stuff. There's going to be people-based stuff, like it'll ask, who's gunning for you, for example. So for that, we can define, all right, who are they? If it's a corporation, which corporation, or what kind at the very least of corporation, because not every corporation is Arasaka or Militech. Some of them are just a minor corporation nearby that maybe has onus with you. It could be something like REO Meatwagon that it just services one very specific part of the city, or has a very specific set of motivators that if a military corporation like Militech or Arasaka came after them, they would be flattened in an hour, right? They wouldn't even have much resistance to put up because they're mostly guarded by booster gangers. So these are all things to consider asking your players. If it's a location, define the location better, get a place in the city, get a reason why they're there. Maybe the rent was just cheap, and they can maintain it. Or maybe they already rent a studio above the, a studio apartment above the club. So the club owner's well, hey, I'm already your landlord. Might as well just, give you this extra space if you can benefit me too, right? There can be some mutual benefit kind of arrangements in there, especially for more service oriented roles like medtech or tech or netrunner, where you can provide a service to the world around you. And it's not just about I'm a violent solo or something. It's, well, I can do you a favor. I have a service to offer. So yeah, I think that's going to pretty well define it. Again, if you have any questions, especially because I know we didn't really delve too deeply into the role life paths themselves, definitely feel free to ask me questions down in the comments. I'm more than happy to answer those, or if you have more specific questions than maybe I answered initially in the video here, I would be more than happy to answer all of those down in the comments below. Again, as always, if you feel I've earned it, please like and subscribe. The goal now is to get up to at least 500 subscribers here on the channel so that I can begin to monetize some things here on YouTube. So any support towards that goal would be greatly appreciated. But as always, I hope you have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I hope you stay healthy, stay safe, and until we talk again, peace.